Hey guys, it's me, Istebrak. I wanted to do a video for this month's Patreon reward on copying from a reference or copying light. So this is a picture I took, generated from Portrait Studio software that I recently developed. And what it does is that it helps you develop your own models. It gives you control over the light, over the model, and over the camera. I'm copying it pretty much here. And I really want to emphasize the fact that working with a large brush is really the only way to deal with that much information. So if you remember the image that I just showed you, a lot is going on. There's a great deal of detail, and sometimes it becomes really confusing for you as the artist to map out all that detail and figure out what to do next and what to drop first. What you have to do, which is something I always do, is squint your eyes or move away from the canvas or move away from your monitor. And what it'll help you see is the larger shadows, the larger maps. If you zoom out of a map, you don't see every tiny little island, but you see the great continent. That's exactly the same thing. You have to zoom out and capture the continents of shadow and throw them in. And that's where you start to capture likeness. And I measured just a little bit with horizontal and vertical lines. It was really all I needed because I wasn't going for a perfect likeness because the model was a little bit nondescript, which is how we modeled it. We tried to keep it nondescript so you guys can get as universal a map out of shadows as possible so it can apply to your own characters. But I didn't care too much for likeness, but I did care a lot about capturing that beautiful nose shadow and those eye socket shadows. They're so important in making the light source present in your image. When the light source has a presence in your image, it has a real connection to what's happening in the form. That's when you have a really awesome painting. That's when you have that successful painting. And one of the first things that I drew is I just kept trying to reinforce, forcing myself to constantly not paint away those large shadows. I'm always going back to them, as you'll see. And you'll see the finished piece. I worked on it a couple days after, but you'll see the finished piece. I also flip my canvas a lot because it's very easy. Once you zoom out into that continent, it's very easy to lose likeness. So that's something else you want to worry about. Yes, I tell you to zoom out. It's really important to zoom out, but remember, once you zoom out, you might capture too much of a molar image of the shadow area that you're looking for of that umbra without capturing the details and particulars. Of course, after you're done with the large brush, you have to go into that daunting middle-sized brush, into the small brush time of your painting session. So it's very important that you flip your canvas constantly to make sure that your molar shadows, those original zoom out shadows, haven't affected the likeness too much. A lot of the likeness is shared between large brush work and small brush work. Always never stress out too much if your image doesn't look good right away. That's one thing I learned off of this. That's one thing I kept reminding myself of. We're human. We're going to get a lot of anxiety as we paint if it doesn't look perfect right away. And for some reason, there's this kind of mentality that early students have that it has to look good from start to finish. It's going to look like shit early on. And if you ever looked at my work, you know that I start off with really messy stuff. It's really how you rearrange those shadows, how you rearrange to create and sculpt that matters. It's the process. It's a struggle, it's an upward climb, and it's a very steep climb, but it doesn't mean that it's a glamorous climb. Of course it's not. It's like, sweat and tears until you get to that perfect combination of light and shadow. And around this point in the painting, if you can see, I started to reach a point where I was comfortable bringing in the dark spots. I still didn't really know what to do with the eyes. I wasn't comfortable with that gaze. It was kind of not what I was going for. And in the reference, the girl's head is tilted just a little bit more, and I didn't really capture that, which was my failure in this piece. Um, but yeah, the blacks are important. The blacks are important to bring in after you've established a really good balance between the large molar continent-like brushstrokes and the small details, which are not painted in any kind of black at all. It's all just grays, which is why it's so difficult because all you have are grays and shades of gray instead of, shades of gray and whites and blacks. All you have early on are just grays. So you have to be able to, your form knowledge is tested because you have to balance your edges. A lot of edge work is necessary to make those subtle gray changes noticeable, to make them affect the form successfully. I was really worried about that edge shadow of the face there because it was making me feel like I was depending on the edge too much. I also wanted to go for she's supposed to be a seer, sorceress, some sort of like psychic. Um, but I also wanted to make her feel dead as well, like a stone statue or something like that, which I did get at the end, but I didn't get it around here. I did end up removing the eyes because that's what really made her feel like a sculpture. But yeah, please remember that it's not a glamorous adventure copying from a reference. And once you take a photo of your reference in Portrait Studio, if you generate it, if you go on Google, it's not gonna look good right away, and that's you're gonna have to forgive yourself for that. You're gonna have to move past that and say, okay, I know where to shrink my brush. I know where to enlarge my brush. I know where to, deal with all of these details. They'll come at their own time. But never be at a point where you're stressing trying to make it look good too early that you start shrinking your brush too soon and you skip like many stairs of brush sizes to get to your small one and then start lowering that value down into black and then start outlining. Those are the biggest dangers when working with a reference. The reason why my image seems half successful or somewhat successful at this point is because I trusted myself. I trusted that at one point or another, I'm going to have to just let go of the fact that it looks shitty. I'm going to have to see the image past the detail that's missing, and then I'm going to have to try to square in and corner in that image with just the large brushes. That's the biggest challenge, is that you're being forced into creating a painting with nothing, but it's like having a hand with no fingers. You're trying to paint with no fingers, you're painting just with your palms. You don't have a small enough tool to deal with all that detail. And that's what you have to do. That's what the masters say you have to do. That's how we train ourselves. So that's the biggest challenge when copying from a reference. Shrink your brush. Don't use your fingernails to paint. Use your palms to paint, basically is what I mean if you compare it to sculpting. You can't go around, bringing a big piece of square marble and trying to start off with the details. No. When you sculpt in real life, you have to etch out the larger shape, the larger cubes, the larger spheres, and bring them together in order to get some sort of foundation for the form, for the skeleton, for the muscle, for the anatomy. And then you start bringing in those smaller chisels, those smaller little nails, and then you start carving away at the detail at the eyelids, bringing in the dark spots, carving away at the nostrils. You can't take away too much before you've made a sculpture, before you've made the large brush work, because you're going to carve away at what you don't know you were going to need, right? You're not going to know where the nostrils are going to end up being. You have to do the large work first and set it up for the detail. The detail is critical. It really depends critically on a really, really good handle of the large molar continent-like brush strokes. So don't forget that. And if you're interested in buying Portrait Studio, it's available on my website right now, and it's a great place. It's a great way to study because it removes all the excess detail and helps you focus only on light behavior and light behavior on form. And that's such a learning experience for me to paint this one piece because I learned where I was weak. I learned that I was tempted to shrink my brush and start outlining. It was such a dangerous temptation, but I had to fight back and figure out really what I wanted to do with this specific painting. Did I want to make it a masterpiece? And I was starting to think like masterpiece, and then I realized you need to take a step back and realize that this was a really large struggle for you, and it's because you still have this weakness. I still have a weakness, somewhat of a dependency on my brush being small. So it was a great learning experience, and I wish it for all of you. It's something else seeing, looking your weakness in the eye as you paint, and getting over that anxiety and resisting the temptation to shrink your brush. But I've come back with lots of kind of facts on how to deal with it, and I hope these help you. Here's a zoom out of how I finished it. I think I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm not really interested in completing it. It was a great study. It helped me discover the kind of generic face I tend to make. Which is why Portrait Studio is so awesome, because you can bring in some really organic shapes by the randomizer. It'll randomize the model for you. It'll give it all kinds of features, and if those features you want to adjust just a little bit, it's got little sliders for all kinds of features, the length of the nose, the height of the nose, everything you can imagine to customize on a face. It's there, similar to an MMORPG character selection or character design setup. So your model's in full control if you ever feel like you have a generic face that you're stuck with, which I do, and I need to study more on that. So thanks everyone for your patronage. You guys are amazing. I can't do this without you. You guys have opened up my schedule a lot, and I've been painting a lot. If you haven't noticed, I've been doing a lot of personal work ever since I started this Patreon. You guys are wonderful. You're my heroes. Thank you so much. Okay, that's it. I'll see you guys next month. Bye-bye.